It's so good to see you all again, and my prayer, as always, is that you'll learn a lot tonight, and what you learn might edify you and prepare you for some of the perilous times ahead. Now, we do believe there are going to be perilous times, and let's get started. The times will be so perilous, I think, because they will challenge everything that you've ever believed, and you'll be forced in a very short time, without a great deal of time to process the new ideas, to make a decision about what you believe and what fate you're going to choose for yourself. So it pays to know ahead of time what you believe, so you're not under that pressure. We've just covered 3 or 4 sessions on the topic of giants, I think 4 now, but really on the broader topic of legitimizing biblical claims about giants and accommodating evidence that the pre-flood world housed great civilizations, one of which might have been the legendary Atlantis. Now, last week's interest in Atlantis lies in the fact, well, actually it was the previous session, but lies in the fact that the Illuminati secret society started life as the New Atlantis movement, which was looking for ways to find the mythical Atlantis, reinvigorate its religion, and bring it back to life as a superpower in the modern world. One of the best-known Christian presenters in this area of angels, giants, and modern attempts to bring these giants back to life is Steve Quayle, and I think you might find it interesting to pay a visit to his website, which is Gen 6 Productions, and listen to a couple of his YouTube presentations. Now, our guiding principle as we launch into today's study is how the problem of giantism seen before the flood, which was effectively eradicated by the Great Flood, reappeared in the line of Cush after the flood. And what happened to the giants that were driven from Palestine by Joshua? Where did they flee to? Nimrod, you can see a sort of a picture of him in the background there holding a lion under his arm very casually, and that gives you some sense of the scale of the man. Nimrod, who the Encyclopedia Judaica claims is one and the same as Gilgamesh, was a man of huge stature. And Gilgamesh is found famously depicted in his bas-relief as casually holding a lion fast under his left arm, with the lion dwarfed against Gilgamesh's own size. This depiction was removed from the realm of the mythological when a German expedition uncovered the grave of Gilgamesh in the excavations of Uruk in 2003. They found, some claim, a well-preserved body there, although others say a skeleton, but either way it measured nearly 16 feet in length. But these remains were quickly moved to a military storage facility in the United States. If the corpse or bones were in good condition, it would be a boon for military geneticists, because they could then try to isolate the gene that was responsible for Gilgamesh's great height and strength. They can, in principle, use that gene as a retrovirus in the modern day, able to be injected into soldiers to increase their size and strength. In the human body, one's proteins and hormones are controlled by genes, which reside on the chromosomes. Without the genes being activated, the proteins and hormones can't be produced. So if certain hormones or proteins are desired, but the body does not have the gene to produce them, one can instead inject that gene into the bloodstream and leave it to work independently to produce these chemicals. A retrovirus is a retrogene that has a self-replicating property, so its power is far greater as well. Now, retroviruses impinge on the whole area of eugenics and transhumanism, and in the context of military applications can produce super soldiers. We will also have a look at some passages that hint at a time when giants will reappear on the earth. These scriptures seem to be asking whether human beings will find a way to save the DNA of the giants and eventually bring them back to life, much in the style of a Jurassic Park resurrection. There's some evidence that the giants have taken this whole issue into their own hands, creating stasis chambers to preserve themselves intact to the latter days. They're hoping that by that time mankind will have had the technology to then take their bodies and reanimate them. We present a video that makes assertions that such chambers have recently been discovered, located in the Grand Canyon and under mountains in Romania and under hills in Afghanistan and possibly in Antarctica as well. The Antarctic digs, which are now over 15 years underway but have never been sort of publicized, have unearthed prehistoric animals and men, and some of the men that have been found are about 12 feet tall. And they have those long sloping skulls, what they call the Boskop skulls. Now, secret experiments and interest in alien-human hybrids may seem mysterious to many, as alien bodies seem to be generally inferior to human ones, and there seems little to be gained by such hybridizations, at least from the human point of view, but it seems that it is the mental and psychic abilities of the alien that are sought for in the chimera. There's also the possibility, as we've mentioned before, that chimeras whose minds have been put into a hypnotic sleep state are being produced to serve as step-in bodies for demon spirits who want to operate more openly in the human sphere. The whole phenomenon of the black-eyed children that was there a couple of years ago may in fact be a failed experiment in this regard. If you haven't ever come across those, you might want to look on YouTube. There are some videos there. Creation of human-animal chimeras was one of the two reasons given, in fact, in ancient texts for the destruction of their societies. They thought that it displeased the gods so much that the gods then had to interact to stop it. And unfortunately, this is something that's actually also going on in our own day. Now, today's session will include 3 YouTube clips in its middle section, and there should be some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So let's make a start. So, session 32, Giants, part 5. The giants reappear after the flood, but how? One of the features of some of the larger giants was extra fingers and extra rows of teeth, and we see here a picture in the background of a skull of a giant, mouth open, looking up into the top jaw, and you can see 2 rows of teeth there. This is a genetic clue also that polyploid chromosome expression is at least one of the factors at work, which involves the doubling in numbers of certain chromosomes in the organism. These would be the chromosomes that control height and bone development. The fact that Noah's family ends up as almost the last family to remain both morally and genetically pure shows that the giants have been prolific in spreading their seed in the population, and have also caused an outbreak of fornication that has produced a further dissemination of these errant chromosomes. It does not take many generations, actually, after rejection of righteousness and abolition of moral boundaries to corrupt the world. Even in our own times, it has only been 300 years since the Enlightenment took Europe by storm. And since that time, a gentle but continuous shift in morality has brought Europe and the world to a state in which modesty is virtually absent and sexuality knows no bounds. In fact, even in 2018, there was discussion both in Canada and America of legalizing things like bestiality, not criminalizing it anyway. And so this just shows you that they're pushing toward removing all barriers as the long-term goal. Now, swingers clubs, gay clubs, and the whole LTGB, and I don't know what the other letter was, society are alive and vocal, and LTGB issues are at the top of the modern legal agenda in relation to the question of recognition of gay marriages, where the word gay now has been extended to include transgenders and the whole spectrum that runs from normal through to extremely aberrant. The communism of the countries ruled by Russia also threw scorn at religious belief and made wanton sexual behavior just about the only thing that left people free of state regulation. Infidelity in marriage, however, were notable in these countries and huge. And the highest echelons of government saw military, in the highest echelons of government in the military, sodomy and the practice of sexual shaming for new recruits as they came into the circles of power were rampant, and parties at foreign embassies promoted this same behavior also. And this is as true in Russia as it is in the United States or in Europe, but it's especially attached to the overseas American embassies and the communities that collect around those embassies. The increase in Satanism in the last century has also encouraged sexual cruelty and perversity, as well as incorporating these into ritual murder and rituals of possession. In fact, it's part of the mentality of these groups to take everything that's good and to defile it. So the things that are considered evil, they treat as if they're good, and vice versa. The sexual revolution of the 1960s and the contraceptive pill in the 70s combined as a failed floodgate that gave place to a society today that will not be told what to do sexually. Sex trafficking has only increased in recent decades, as has child slavery, and to some degree this rampant sexual appetite is to blame. The sexual exploitation of children, whether by media stars or politicians or priests of the Catholic Church, is horrible and rampant today. The terrible truth is that children, over 70,000 per year in the United States alone, and some say 100,000, continue to be raped and killed in satanic rituals, and their organs are privately sold to hospitals who also incinerate their bodies. The worst thing is that those who kill them even make money off them. This crime claims well over 100,000 children per year globally, while other abducted children remain alive but go into sex slavery or even off-world colonies where similar fates may await them. Sexual freedom is one of the easiest ways to indulge the human being and draw him away from God. As Joshua sought permission to lead Israel through the Moabite territories, ready to commence his wars in Canaan, the Moabite festival at Baal Peor got underway. This festival involved open sexual games to honor the god Baal. In fact, Baal is even worshipped in the modern world amongst our politicians, albeit under a different name. And it was very quickly in the case of ancient Israel, led tens of thousands of Israel's soldiers into corruption, so that 23,000 of them had to be killed by the Levites to bring their behavior to a stop. The moral state of the world today is really little different to that of Sodom and Gomorrah in the time of Abraham. Revelation 11 is right, in fact, when it says that the great city, that is the symbolic Babylon, the world's system, is also called Sodom and Egypt. I think the point I want to make is that this entire turnaround in modern morality happened in little more than a generation. Just one generation. Although the hardships endured during the World Wars also played its part in pushing out prudish old standards and tolerating newer, freer ones. The giants in Genesis 6, by comparison, had around 660 years to do their evil work, until the flood came. And this is really a very long time for society to stand against a morally corrupting influence. It equates to about 20 generations in the modern world, and possibly to something similar in the pre-flood world, especially if the giants just kept taking wives for themselves as they pleased. It's not hard to see how the hearts of men had become only evil all of the time by then, and had lost all inclination to follow cleanly and simply after Jehovah. Indeed, like today, the angels had probably taught the people to resent Jehovah and his restrictions, putting him forward as a kind of a slave master. With such a degree of corruption in the world, both morally and genetically, it's no wonder that errant seed could have mixed across into the bloodlines of any of the wives of Noah's sons. And while it expressed itself primarily in Ham, there is nothing to say that some of the genetic corruption was not also dormant in the lines of Japheth and Shem, or in their wives. Genetic traces of giantism were clearly evident in the line of Ham, and Noah's grandson Cush and great-grandson Nimrod were both of great stature. In Canaan, the new emergent giant offspring were called Rephaim, literally the terrifying ones. The Rephaim, who are later identified as just one of the families of giants in Canaan, were, according to the Ras Shamrat poems, quote, demigods, that means half god, half human, who worshipped the Amorite god Baal, the ruler of the underworld. And here we have another clue as to the abomination of desolation. The giants, also called the Rephaim, or the terrible ones, were worshippers of Baal, who they also called Lord of the underworld. They believed they would join Baal in the underworld after they died, and continue to live as princes there. Even those who sin openly in modern sexual orgies and the like do so in part as a kind of ritualistic demonstration of their debauchery to Baal, who is just a Mediterranean conduit for the universal worship of Lucifer in the underworld. Ideas that the giants introduced to human society still lay at the heart of such religions as seek to scorn the biblical God through their unholy practices. It is in Isaiah 14 that God mocks King Nebuchadnezzar's belief that he himself is a living God, and we get the Genesis story in God's answer. Of course, someone else is being accused as we speak. Nebuchadnezzar's human pride is being likened to that of Semjaza, the leader of the fallen angels in Eden, and also to that of Adam and Eve, who ultimately, in doing what they did, expressed a great deal of pride, the pride of life, the love of themselves. All of these figures, Nebuchadnezzar, Semjaza, and Adam and Eve, have all been leaders of the human race, but pride has been the equal downfall of them all. Excessive love of self has been demonstrated in the language and actions of all of them. The Rephaim giants were referred to by Moses as the re-emergence of the antediluvian Nephilim, as if the Rephaim were somehow reincarnations of the souls of those Nephilim giants destroyed in the flood. They were otherwise somehow physical descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim. In Ugaritic lore, the spirits of the deceased Rephaim would travel into the underworld, where they would join Baal's acolyte assembly of lesser gods, kings, heroes, and rulers. They supposedly possessed the power once there to physically reincarnate as Nephilim on the earth. Isaiah is utilizing this theology of a ruling class in the underworld when he speaks of how the king of Babylon will eventually be brought to the grave and join these ranks. In prophesying against the Babylonian leader, Isaiah 14 verses 9 to 10 say, Hell, that is Sheol or Hades, from beneath is moved to meet thee at thy coming. It stirs up the dead, that is the Rapha or Rephaim, for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones, which is satirical for their graves, all the kings of the nations, and they shall say unto thee, Art thou become as weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Probably Isaiah 14 includes the spirits of the cast out angels with the spirits of earth's departed kings, when it speaks of them twisting in their thrones, that is, their graves, to see the spectacle of this mighty Babylonian king, self-proclaimed King of Kings, who has now been lowered into their subterranean midst. To recap then, Isaiah 14 discourse certainly makes mockery of the pride and self-grandeur of human kings. It mocks the king's belief that he has divine power, as if he could also overcome death. In death, all the offices of human life are stripped away, of course. And the fact that the human being cannot escape death means that he should be humble in his life and not proud. That is, death makes mockery of all human pride. Now, the reference in Isaiah 14 to the anointed cherub that covers elsewhere in the same passage is not Lucifer at all, as is so often taught, but it is Adam, and in his stead later in history the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. It relates to God's Genesis 1 covenant of dominion with man, where man is placed in charge over everything on the earth. He is the anointed cherub that covers everything that goes on the earth. Now clearly the scene and the story are figurative, but they strike to the heart of the fact that those in the grave are helpless, and they rely on external forces to restore their lives in the world. While this hope is usually placed in the day of resurrection and in the mercy of God, in the case of the giants it will require somebody to acquire the technology to bring their bodies back to life before Judgment Day. We're sort of in that sort of time now when that's either about to be possible or in fact already has become possible and we just haven't been told yet. In fact, I think the latter is probably the truth of the matter. So this in turn will require human beings to become masters of DNA manipulation. Now in a similar passage in Job 26 verse 5 it says, "Dead things are formed under the waters." Other versions render this as, "Can the trembling giants be regenerated under the water?" Well, it shows there's some confusion here about the words and the idea, and even the traditional thinking about the dead and the place of the giants in the underworld. So you notice how different these translations are. One of the two words involved has multiple meanings, and the other is very archaic. Now, the first of these words is rougher, and this can mean any of terrifying, giants, or a dead thing, because a dead thing is also in a way scary. The dead plural in Job 26 are the Rephaim, the terrifying ones, or the scary ones. But because the text was originally unpointed, that is, written without the vowel pointers, the word might originally actually have been giants, which is Rephaim instead of Raphaim. The archaic word is kul, or chul, I think in Hebrew you say chul, which most literally is trembled, but in figurative usage it can mean turned, or twisted, or wound, or formed, because a lot of things are formed through winding and twisting. Now, some modern writers think the passage in Isaiah could in fact be translated as "the giants are formed again," as if their DNA perhaps were being rewound. This may cash in on an ancient belief propagated in folklore that the fallen giants continue to struggle against their incarceration in the underworld, always in the hope of escape. This fear is more or less captured in the following comment by Adam Clarke, who refers to ancient fears that earthquakes were signs that the giants were trying to arise. I'll just quote what he says here. "We know, however, that an opinion anciently prevailed that the Titans, a race of men of enormous stature, rebelled against the gods, and endeavoured to scale heaven by placing one mountain on the top of another." I think perhaps we can think here of the Tower of Babel. "And that they and their structure were cast down by the thunder of the deities, and buried under the earth and sea." This may be now a reference to the story of Atlantis. "And that legends hold that it is their struggles to arise that produce the earthquakes which occur in certain countries." So, in case you're wondering who Adam Clarke is, this comment comes from the 1821 commentary on the King James Bible. Now, the implication of this and similar texts is that beneath the surface of the earth, agents of darkness wait patiently for their time of reinstatement into the world of men. And how interesting now that we're discovering stasis giants. There may, however, be an ancient confusion with the stories of the giants and the fallen angels. You see, unlike the giants, the angels are not dead. They are merely incarcerated in spiritual prisons somewhere under the earth and guarded by angels. There is a moment in time when they will indeed be released. However, it's only to be led to their destruction. It's clear that they wait patiently for their freedom, and as angels are probably more patient than humans. But their release is only for a short time, only enough to assist and empower the final Antichrist, and if they are clever, they will be in contact with the cultists already, trying to arrange things ahead of time, with their topside helpers to make use of their time when they are released. The occultists are, of course, in a very strong bargaining position in this arrangement, and many believe that this explains how so much fantastic technology has become available in the last century or so. Some of the best but also darkest technologies have come through occult researchers. Where the alien grace fit in exactly continues to be something of a mystery, however. But we've presented a few ideas on this already. Now, these ancient aliens, if you like, were depicted already, it seems, in Egyptian hieroglyphs. And if we look at that metal work in the picture on the screen now, you can sort of see what looks like a UFO there, and one or two symbols that maybe could be considered to be alien. But anyway, carrying on. They're even depicted, it seems, in these Egyptian hieroglyphs and in some ancient rock etchings, and they seem to have been around since the first kingdoms after the flood. It's not just a local effect. The only explanation for these entities, who seem to be complicit in modern stories of abductions, is that they escaped off-planet before the flood occurred and returned afterwards to continue their work, which may have been as simple as the search for food in the time of the giants. Now, the Greys seem to be a form of android clone, not quite life as we understand it, but nevertheless living. They are perhaps an early product of pre-flood angelic technology. But it may be that occultists have learned from the angels that they should work with these Greys because they have some knowledge of how genetics works. Now, this would have been a smart move on the part of the angels, a kind of insurance policy against disaster. The pre-flood genetic experiments carried out by the fallen angels may well have their modern counterpart in continuing reports of alien abductions and hybridization experiments in underground bases. You might want to compare the site survivormall.com, where it goes into this a little bit, and with the Greys being involved in both ventures, that is, the abductions and the hybridization experiments in the underground bases. And so at this point, we're going to stop and have a look at 3 videos, none of them too long, maybe a few minutes each, before we continue. So just sit back and enjoy these.
Awakened stasis giants secretly located and imprisoned by global elite. By Dr. Michael Salla. April 2, 2016. Website: exopolitics.org. Giants that have been in hibernation in stasis chambers for thousands of years are awakening, and are being sought out by elite military forces, according to several independent sources. After being located, awakened giants are allegedly being captured and held hostage by powerful global elite groups that do not want the rest of humanity to learn the truth. Secret space program whistleblower, Corey Goode, was among the first to publicly disclose the existence of stasis chambers that were holding perfectly preserved giants for thousands of years. In an August 4, 2015 interview on the popular show, Cosmic Disclosure, Goode discussed how he had accessed information on smart glass pads during his covered service about these sleeping giants and the technology of the stasis chambers that were preserving them. Goode said, "When I was in the program, the secret space program, when I would have time to sit and look at the smart glass pad, there was lots of information that I looked at. And one of them was that there were beings that they found underneath the surface of Earth, usually underneath mountains, burial mountains. Indian burial mounds that were not dead but weren't quite alive. They called them stasis beings. And it turned out that had used a technology that had been there long prior, from this group they called the ancient builder race. So, it didn't put the beings in stasis that a lot of us would think of, as in being frozen. But it just changed the way they experienced time. They would probably go to sleep for maybe 20 minutes, and 30,000 years or so would pass by. Good described the size of the beings found in the stasis chambers when they were first discovered in the 19th century, all over the planet. And to look down in, they saw these very tall beings, or very large giant humans with reddish beards. These tall, red-headed, red-beard groups were in Europe and South and North America. And apparently, at one time, before the last ice age apparently, they had a very large area that they ruled. Good gave examples of stasis chambers that had been found around the world. Some were still operating with different modern human groups that had learned to use the technology, while others had been damaged and the beings in stasis had died as a result. According to Good, once located, the stasis giants were kept hidden, and any that awakened would join others and not be allowed to interact with the general public. According to Stephen Quayle, who has written several books about giants, elite U.S. military forces have been stationed around the world, including trouble spots such as Afghanistan, to locate the giants. Quayle cites elite military personnel who have spoken about battles with the giants. During one of Quayle's radio interviews on Coast to Coast AM, one of his military informants called in and told the audience about an incident in Afghanistan involving a deadly encounter between a 12-foot giant and U.S. Special Forces. The informant claimed that the giant had killed 9 members of an elite team sent to capture it, and it took a second team to arrive and finally kill the giant. Quayle uses biblical sources to support his analysis of giants and what they mean for humanity in the current era. Basically, he views them as the biblical Nephilim, who are the offspring of demonic entities that are hostile to humanity. The Nephilim/giants, according to Quayle, were predicted to re-emerge during the end times, and be restored to power by the corrupt global elite. In his book, Long Walkers, Return of the Nephilim, Quayle provides a fiction-based on fact version of what the elite have planned. Before history, giants and fallen angels ruled the earth as gods until mankind revolted in a colossal battle, banishing the bloodthirsty creatures. But now Joshua Kincaid has made an alarming discovery: some of the giants are still alive, kept in secret underground caverns in suspended animation, waiting to be revived. Worse, a secret society operating outside the law is intent on bringing the monsters back to life and restoring the creatures as rulers of mankind. Interestingly, Quayle's sources have confirmed that giants have been preserved in stasis chambers for extended periods, and are now awakening. This is consistent with what Good discovered on the smart glass pads. However, Quayle's view that the giants are bloodthirsty Nephilim ready to work with the global elite to restore demonic control over the planet does not correspond with what Good read on the smart glass pads. According to Good, the motivations of the giants were far more complex than what Quayle was suggesting. Giants belonged to highly evolved civilizations in human history who had preserved themselves in stasis chambers to sleep through the dark ages of humanity. Their awakening was a sign that we are on the verge of a global shift, and many of the giants want to play a constructive role in this transition, rather than simply reassert control over surface humanity. Another independent source has come forward to discuss the motivations of stasis giants, and how they are being found and treated by covert special forces personnel. Cobra, a pseudonym, claims to be both an extraterrestrial contactee and an operative for a global resistance movement that dates back to 1975, when it was first established in the underground tunnels of New York City. While there is controversy over Cobra's identity and activities, he has released much information that is very accurate in terms of my own independent research into secret space programs and visitation by extraterrestrial life. His information, therefore, deserves careful consideration. I will consequently leave an examination of the controversy surrounding Cobra and what this means given the accuracy of his claims, for a later article. In a March 21 interview, Cobra spoke about stasis giants and provides an additional source of information about their activities. In the interview, he responded to a series of questions concerning stasis giants. Richard, thank you. There are many reports of dormant giants being discovered and awakening in caverns around the world. Are these claims accurate? Cobra, yes, some of those claims are accurate. Those giants are put into stasis in special chambers which are triggered by a certain vibrational frequency. I would say certain intensity form of subatomic particles and energies from the galactic center, which is the Earth. Those chambers get triggered and those beings then awakened from hibernation, and many such cases have been taking place lately around the world. Militaries of most countries, or shall we say of the major countries, have been suppressing that from the mass population. And whenever that happens, the military went there and just suppressed the whole thing. And yes, it was happening quite much lately. Richard, that's amazing. Are they a positive nature, these giants? Cobra, most of them yes, but some of them no. Cobra's information about the motivation of the giants is very significant, since clearly such beings are physically very powerful, and also hold much information about past civilizations. Cobra's information is consistent with what Good discovered on the smart glass pads, and contrasts with Quayle's analysis. Quayle, though, still raises important points, as the following portion of Cobra's interview suggests. Richard, why are they waking up now? Because of the galactic central sun's activity. Cobra, because they went into those chambers. They didn't want to wait for a change. They have put themselves into hibernation to spare. So not to wait too long on this planet, and now when the change is happening they have interest to take part in this change. But they were not expecting that the surface population will be taken hostage to such a great degree, and now they are taken hostage by the Chimera Group. The Chimera Group, according to Cobra, comprises global elites that are demonic in nature. This is consistent with much witness testimony that many groups of global elites practice various forms of demon worship. It is therefore very plausible that some of the giants might have been co-opted by the global elite in a plan to exert greater global control. In contrast, Quayle believes that the global elite see the giants as their demonic gods, and are therefore helping restore their rule. Quayle's analysis is therefore only partially correct. The giants are not per se associated with demonic forces, but are being sought by elite groups that are indeed associated with such forces, since the giants, at least those positively inclined, can play a constructive role with the global awakening of humanity. This is what Good has claimed he learned from smart glass pads, and also what Cobra was told by his sources in his recent interview. Richard, what was their actual function? What is these beings? What is the function to wake up in this time period to do within this time of the planetary liberation process? Cobra, they wanted to participate in the shift. They have various agendas. Some of them were quite positive and some of them not so positive. But they were not expecting that the amount of control and suppression on this planet would go that far. All of them were captured and are now actually hostages in the various militarily bases around the world. If accurate, then Cobra's information helps corroborate the earlier claims of Good regarding the awakening of stasis giants, and their potential impact on the rest of humanity in a positive manner during an evolutionary change. In this regard, Good said, "This huge vibratory change in our solar system. This change, supposedly we're changing from graduating from one density to another. We're in transition. So if this is true and these beings are awakening, and they set themselves to wake up during this time period, I could only speculate that they wanted to be part of that." In contrast, Quayle's analysis overlooks the possibility that giants are being held in captivity by demonic groups, but are not themselves demonic, or, at least, not the majority of them, according to Good and Cobra's information. For those giants that are inclined to work with the global elite, then Quayle's analysis raises a chicken and egg problem over demonic influences when it comes to the global elite and some of the awakened stasis giants. The problem with Quayle's analysis is that he makes the major assumption that all stasis giants are demonic in nature based solely on his interpretation of biblical texts. Consequently, he appears to tacitly support the current secret policy of locating, imprisoning, and/or eliminating stasis giants, wherever they are found around the world, using elite military forces. Not only is Quayle's analysis deficient in this regard, but he may in fact be unwittingly helping the very demonic elite groups that want to hide the majority of these giants from public view, while possibly using others in a covert plan for exerting great influence over global affairs. In conclusion, there is broad agreement between Good, Quayle, and Cobra that awakened giants are being actively sought after by elite global groups and special military forces all over the world. When captured, they are taken to secret detention facilities. Clearly, the existence of giants who have hibernated for thousands of years in stasis chambers is a matter of great public interest, as is their motivations for choosing to awaken from long periods of hibernation in the modern era. The information awakened stasis giants have about ancient human civilizations, advanced technologies, and extraterrestrial life deserves to be publicly released as soon as possible, and not withheld to further the interest of global elites who may be seeking ways to manipulate these giant captives.
Steve, in your book True Legends, you talk about a Smithsonian cover-up whenever giant bones are involved. So I want to ask you the question that everybody always asks. Where are all the giant bones?
It's interesting, Tim, because of the bias of the Smithsonian and their contempt for out-of-place artifacts. Every time giants were found, it didn't matter if it was on the West Coast, the Arctic, the Antarctic, believe it or not, the East Coast, the Ohio River mounds, they always have a fabulous cutoff point, meaning once the Smithsonian is notified and those bones are sent to the Smithsonian, they're never heard from again. And there's denials. A good example of that, it was a famous Kincaid expedition in the Grand Canyon, where they found the Egyptian citadel. Even the Phoenix Gazette carried that story. So, Tim, the cover-up has always been to keep this biblically relevant topic out of the minds of the people, so at an appropriate time in the future, they can claim whatever they want to claim, and they'll claim anything and everything apart from the true biblical origin of giants.
So, Steve, even during World War II, there were reports of giants and cannibalism coming out of the Solomon Islands. What was that all about?
After World War II, people couldn't reconcile the fact that a lot of servicemen, U.S. servicemen, had been eaten, cannibalized, as well as Japanese. And the fascinating investigation I've come up with was the fact that the Solomon Islands are riddled with stories of cannibalistic giants and even living giants to this day. I was contacted by a man named Marius who was literally going to meet me in California with, let's just say this, irrefutable evidence. But he said to me on the phone, he said, Steve, I'm being followed, and I'm not sure I'll even make it there alive. What has to be asked, the question that needs to be asked and has to be asked, is that why do people who have the evidence, why are they intimidated? Why are they threatened? Why are they disappeared? What is this cover-up? And I'll tell you the bottom line, they do not want people to understand that the sons of God, the fallen angels, saw that the daughters of earth were fair, mated with them, and produced a literally new race of hybrid beings that the Bible calls the Rephaim. And the Rephaim are with us today. They're genetic trace, they're genetic markers. And when we get into super soldiers, Tim, the super soldiers, the most important expenditures made are to identify not only the bloodline, but the genetic traits. There are people literally not only wanting to bring the giants back, but to insert giant genes in our soldiers to give them the super soldier ability. More money is being spent to identify genetic traces and markers, the actual gene prints of giants, both dead and extractable DNA from their teeth, from whatever cells in the mummies, to literally living giants today.
So in other words, what you're saying is somebody's trying to weaponize giant genes.
Absolutely. And the super soldier program is probably one of the most almost unbelievable, yet so believable programs that the U.S. military is involved in. And all the underground labs, all the secret places around the planet, everybody's after the same thing. They want comic book heroes that we would only laugh about and have laughed about maybe for 50 years, and now it's no longer fantasy, it's fact.
And we're not just talking about superhuman strength, are we? We're also talking about superhuman cerebral capabilities that the giants had.
Absolutely. Speaking of cerebral capabilities, the giants, even when they're in a stasis state, that means in suspended animation, whether it's Dr. Ernest Muldashev in Russia, in the mountains of Tibet, whether it's a whole underground base in which some of these entities, these living giants, are present, they have so much cerebral energy that they actually have what's called the red line. And you can't go past that, or literally, they claim, according to special operations, 4-star generals, that literally it causes a person to almost come apart at the seams. It not only drives people mad, but it literally just causes them to go to pieces. You understand that's the ultimate weapon. You know, Michael Crichton with Jurassic Park brought us dinosaurs, and now we're hearing about woolly mammoths being cloned. And we're hearing all these news stories that Neanderthal is no longer a member of our family tree, which I've said for 30 years. But the point being is that it's all about weapons. And as a general said to me in special operations, it doesn't matter if it's ancient technology, doesn't matter if it's ancient genetics, those of us are either fighting to keep it out of the hands of the wrong people, or the wrong people are fighting us to kill us to get it into their hands. There's a war going on, and it's no longer just dusty old bones in a museum stuck away.
So Steve, according to Genesis 6, fallen angels had sexual relations with human women, creating these hybrid half-angel, half-human giants. In a weaponized, military weaponized sense, what other capabilities might these super soldiers have if they have the genes of giants?
Well, beyond the obvious of strength, beyond the obvious of almost supervision, super hearing, one of the most remarkable things from my 4-star general friend was basically said they hunt by DNA. Every person's DNA has a specific harmonic that they could identify a specific target's DNA and assign a Fido, the 19-foot giant, to go after. And it was interesting because when you think about it, even going back to Jack the Giant Killer and Jack Be Nimble, Jack Be Quick, as I've been researching all these, remember the statement? Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. You go to the Bible, and whose blood cried out? Righteous Abel blood cried out to the living God after Cain slew him. So the harmonics of blood is fascinating. That's why the cry of the innocent blood is such a big deal in God's eyes, and it truly is, because the blood has a signal, a frequency, and there have been studies to prove that. So they want the giants to be able to basically target specific DNA characteristics. Not to mention the bottom line, and you know how much I love to say that, these entities want every last human being destroyed, and in its place a hybrid. They're going to try and prove that God's a liar. Jesus himself said if the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive, yet for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened.
You've turned down opportunities to work with some of the major networks on documentaries concerning giants. Why have you decided not to work with them? And furthermore, why have you decided to start your own production company, Gen 6 Productions?
Tim, it's just simply this. I believe the big lie that's going to be hoisted upon the world is that the aliens created mankind, which I categorically reject. It's funny, the people that will accept the fact that the Anunnaki, star creatures, came to this planet will avoid fallen angels like a plague. I wanted the correct, in my opinion, after 40 years of research, I wanted the correct historic and biblical presentation of the giants. And quite candidly, when I talk to some of them, if I start talking about fallen angels having sex with earth women, they snicker. Well, that snicker tells me they've already made up their mind. And I said, I will only appear on camera if I can have final edit of what I say. Guess what? Nobody wanted to do that. That tells me there's agenda. So I believe this is a time that you and I are going to basically go out and say to the world, okay, here's what those guys are saying, but here's not only what the Bible says, and here's how accurate the Bible is with the history that follows. Gen 6 Productions is totally different than everything else that's on the TV, everything else that's on the documentary. Everybody's looking in a rear-view mirror at history, just trying to find the bones and find the original documents of all of the different finds, and I've spent 20 years doing that already. But we're taking people, Tim, simply where no one else has ever gone before. They're starting from the premise that all the giants are gone. We're starting from the premise that there are modern-day giants now who aren't suffering from acromegaly or some pituitary disorder, but they're literally going to fulfill the biblical statement of Matthew 24, where Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, so would it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Most people do not understand the evil. Most people can't even embrace the fact that this isn't about old bones. This is about a contemporary threat beyond any science fiction twisting of the facts. And that's why we're going to, I believe the best antidote, that's why we're going to do this thing, Gen 6 Productions. We're going to present information. We're going to present eyewitness testimony. Again, we're not just dealing with bones. Obviously, we'll follow the leads of bones, but we're going to show the people out there what the truth is and why this cover-up has been a multi-thousand-year cover-up, and what the expectation that everyone is going to, not only the expectation, but what is going to be presented to the people as the gods who made us. And I got to share this. When I did write the book True Legends, Genesis 6 Giants, Aliens and Fallen Angels, Angel Wars, everything I've written is to this point where Jesus said, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. And the genetic tampering, the genetic destruction, the designs of the Luciferian globalists to destroy every human being on the planet, to insert their new creation, that we'll call him the Uberman, Nietzsche's statement, the Superman. What it's going to be is a super slaughter. And by giving people the correct information, by literally telling them what the end of the book is, how this plays out in history, my goal is to take away all fear and show them that the truth will make them free as long as they abide in the word of the Lord and the word of the Lord abides in them. Too many people are making too many excuses for the living God, and I'm looking for that time when the people of God will stand up, when the people of God will not take a back seat to the skeptic, whose the only agenda he has is what he's being paid to say. We're going to produce, I would say, such a different documentary form and style that I think people will be really excited, and especially to get involved with the Senate.
In other words, rather than looking for the giants that were, we're looking for the giants that are.
Absolutely. And I find it fascinating. Just as we're literally in the time of the movie of Noah, which was just a disaster biblically, it wasn't even anywhere near the scripture, but the times of Noah, isn't it interesting? The times of Noah, and now we got all this interest in giants. Hello, I don't think God could give a bigger neon sign than if he wrote it in the sky. And I'm not taking liberty, but even as everything is lining up, we are in the days of Noah. In the Noah days, there were giants in the land. And now we're having Hollywood just come out with movie after movie after movie, trying to denigrate biblical Moses, it doesn't matter if it's Noah, trying to distort true history so they can insert their own history. For instance, in the movie Noah, This is pretty fascinating. Most people don't know this. The fallen angels are the good guys, and Noah's the bad guy.
No, they're called the Watchers, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're called the Watchers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think what we're going to do is be able to give you a compressed, truly a compressed understanding of history that, when I say mind-blowing, it'll also be heart-freeing. It will help you to understand the headlines, the movies, and the ultimate plan and scheme for your destruction. But the good news is, Jesus said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. And I believe that, Tim, we're at that time in history now. We're in the days of Noah, and everything that preceded Noah building the ark and the judgment of Almighty God on this earth that was in rebellion is about to be relived.
Gilgamesh, or Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel. His tomb was found in Iraq in 2003, and his giant skeleton has been found and retrieved. Archaeologists in Iraq believe they found the lost tomb of King Gilgamesh, the subject of the oldest book in history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written by Middle Eastern scholars 2,500 years before Christ, commemorating the life of the ruler of the city of Uruk, from which Iraq gets its name. Gilgamesh, also known as Nimrod. Now a German-led expedition discovered what is thought to be the entire city of Uruk, including where the Euphrates once flowed, the last resting place of its famous king, Gilgamesh. John Fassinber of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich said, "I don't want to say definitely it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the epic." In the book, actually a setting of inscribed clay tablets, the tablets say that Gilgamesh was described as having been buried under the Euphrates in a tomb apparently constructed when the waters of the ancient river parted, flowing following his death. Fassbinder said, "We found just outside the city, an area in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building which could be interpreted as a burial." He said the amazing discovery of the ancient city under the Iraqi desert had been made possible by modern technology. He adds, "By differences in magnetization in the soil, you can look into the ground. The difference between mud bricks and sediments in the Euphrates River gives a very detailed structure. This creates a magnetogram, which is then digitally mapped, effectively giving a town plan of Uruk. It was a Venice in the desert. The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by Gilgamesh. We covered more than 100 hectares. We found garden structures and field structures as depicted in the epic, and we found Babylonian houses. He also said the most astonishing find was the incredibly sophisticated system of canals, adding, very clearly we can see the canals, some structures showing that flooding destroyed some houses, which means it was a highly developed system. So why is it so interesting that his tomb has been found? It's interesting considering that Gilgamesh was believed to be part human, part alien, part angel. He was Nephilim, Anunnaki, Nephilim, fallen angels, the offspring of the fallen angels, as in Genesis 6, notably what we could call a hybrid. It's also interesting to note that Gilgamesh has been compared to and could very well be King Nimrod, who was the son of Cush and a descendant of Noah and the king of Babylon, the same Nimrod that built the Tower of Babel, translated as the gateway to heaven, to defy God. And we mentioned this regarding the overwhelming amount of information that has come to light recently of DNA genetic manipulation and its use in science and technology even today. Was the Iraq invasion a forward smokescreen for the enablement of Western powers to gain ancient alien technologies and possible DNA for future engineering and a possible resurrection and cloning of a DNA angel, Gilgamesh Nimrod? There are those who believe that that is so. There are those who believe that there was a driving force behind the resurrection of Nimrod, Gilgamesh. That was the primary reason for the East events. 1 month after archaeologists digging in her desert sands claimed to have found the tomb of Gilgamesh, just 4 years after the secret chambers of Osiris's empty tomb were found in Egypt. Behold, I have told you before, wherefore if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning come out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24:25-28. In a recent interview on Omega Men Radio, Tom Horn and Steve Quayle talked about the discovery of that carcass of course, Gilgamesh, Nimrod, and they began talking about how Nimrod began to become a giant. And then they started talking about the discovery of Gilgamesh's remains, and Steve Quayle said, I talked to Special Operations General who validated that, verified that, and absolutely was there when Gilgamesh's remains, and his words were, he was in a state of remarkable preservation. And by the way, that was in the literal vicinity of where the United States built its largest military complex. I believe it's one of the largest military complexes in the world. In that whole area, the advanced team Special Operations went in there to grab all that stuff. What I'm telling you is based on multi-star general's eyewitness reports to me, who was there. He said, they have Gilgamesh's remains. So if they have Gilgamesh and he is Nimrod, they got it. The whole point is to extract the DNA. And I've also been told that the whole point of the Human Genome Project is to locate specific genetic markers for the disembodied spirits to reanimate their host body that's brought back. So this is in fact Babylon Rising, the return of the Nephilim. And Steve Quayle goes on to say that he believes that this is indeed the real reason of remaining in Iraq for the better part of the last decade. The fact that U.S. troops are now coming back out of Babylon tells us that they have accomplished whatever it is they needed to do, which makes us wonder what or who else may be coming out of Babylon with them. I'll leave a link below for you for these articles. Clearly we can see the canals, some structures showing that flooding destroyed some houses, which means it was a highly developed system. So why is it so interesting that his tomb has been found? It's interesting considering that Gilgamesh was believed to be part human, part alien, part angel. He was Nephilim, Anunnaki, Nephilim, fallen angels, the offspring of the fallen angels, as in Genesis 6, notably what we could call a hybrid. It's also interesting to note that Gilgamesh has been compared to and could very well be King Nimrod, who was the son of Cush and a descendant of Noah and the king of Babylon, the same Nimrod that built the Tower of Babel, translated as the gateway to heaven, to defy God. And we mentioned this regarding the overwhelming amount of information that has come to light recently of DNA genetic manipulation and its use in science and technology even today. Was the Iraq invasion a forward smokescreen for the enablement of Western powers to gain ancient alien technologies and possible DNA for future engineering and a possible resurrection and cloning of a DNA angel, Gilgamesh Nimrod? There are those who believe that that is so. There are those who believe that there was a driving force behind the resurrection of Nimrod, Gilgamesh. That was the primary reason for the East events. 1 month after archaeologists digging in her desert sands claimed to have found the tomb of Gilgamesh, just 4 years after the secret chambers of Osiris's empty tomb were found in Egypt. Behold, I have told you before, wherefore if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning come out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24:25-28. In a recent interview on Omega Men Radio, Tom Horn and Steve Quayle talked about the discovery of that carcass of course, Gilgamesh, Nimrod, and they began talking about how Nimrod began Gilgamesh, or Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel. His tomb was found in Iraq in 2003, and his giant skeleton has been found and retrieved. Archaeologists in Iraq believe they found the lost tomb of King Gilgamesh, the subject of the oldest book in history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written by Middle Eastern scholars 2,500 years before Christ, commemorating the life of the ruler of the city of Uruk, from which Iraq gets its name. Gilgamesh, also known as Nimrod. Now a German-led expedition discovered what is thought to be the entire city of Uruk, including where the Euphrates once flowed, the last resting place of its famous king, Gilgamesh. John Fassenberg of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich said, I don't want to say definitely it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the epic. In the book, actually a setting of inscribed clay tablets, the tablets say that Gilgamesh to become a giant, and then they start talking about the discovery of Gilgamesh's remains, and Steve Quayle said, I talked to Special Operations General who validated that, verified that, and absolutely was there when Gilgamesh's remains, and his words were, he was in a state of remarkable preservation. And by the way, that was in the literal vicinity of where the United States built its largest military complex. I believe it's one of the largest military complexes in the world. In that whole area, the advanced team Special Operations went in there to grab all that stuff. What I'm telling you is based on multi-star general's eyewitness reports to me, who was there. He said, they have Gilgamesh's remains. So if they have Gilgamesh and he is Nimrod, they got it. The whole point is to extract the DNA. And I've also been told that the whole point of the Human Genome Project is to locate specific genetic markers for the disembodied spirits to reanimate their host body that's brought back. So this is in fact Babylon Rising, the return of the Nephilim. Gilgamesh was described as having been buried under the Euphrates in a tomb apparently constructed when the waters of the ancient river parted, flowing following his death. Fassbinder said, "We found just outside the city, an area in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building which could be interpreted as a burial." He said the amazing discovery of the ancient city under the Iraqi desert had been made possible by modern technology. He adds, "By differences in magnetization in the soil, you can look into the ground. The difference between mud bricks and sediments in the Euphrates River gives a very detailed structure. This creates a magnetogram, which is then digitally mapped, effectively giving a town plan of Uruk. It was a Venice in the desert. The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by Gilgamesh. We covered more than 100 hectares. We found garden structures and field structures as depicted in the epic, and we found Babylonian houses." He also said the most astonishing find was the incredibly sophisticated system of canals, adding, very, very clear.
This was an interesting catch. Certain channel here on YouTube, True Seeker 69, caught this image, and actually you can see the video here, from the Ferguson riots, where they burned the town to the ground. Watch this here.
Out here, bro, we out here.
Notice anything a little off here? Look at this. These guys are all standing in the same location, okay? All within a few feet of each other. And you can see this guy here clearly is much taller. The top of his head's right here. You got all these guys, they're all about the same height. Every single one of them is about the same height, except for this one guy who's about this tall. I'm thinking, if these guys are like 5'11", this guy's probably about 9 foot, I'm guessing, based on how it looks. And this was something that was recorded back in 2014, so it's something that people completely missed. Look how big this guy is. It's pretty shocking, isn't it? Here's a still photo of him.
I just got 2 still shot.
Okay, here we go. And then there's this same lady here. She also was showing a picture of the same location from a different vantage point here. Let me see if I can find it. Right, here we go. So here's the same vantage point. I mean the same location. You can see the same vehicle. This car's actually, I think, slightly back in the video footage. And you can see, and there's actually a pole too. See here, there's a pole right there. Okay, this is how you can tell they're actually close together. You can see here it appears as if they're close together, but you could ask yourself, is this an optical illusion somehow, right? But actually, you see where they're standing. They're standing on the same pavement. And here's the car, and here's the pole. If you go over here, you see the same pole and the same car. So they're all standing in this area on this pavement here. They're not. None of them are standing on the sidewalk. Like you could say to yourself, well, maybe those other guys are standing back here, and then that guy is standing on the sidewalk if his feet were on the sidewalk, but they're not. Okay, even if his feet were up here on the sidewalk, the fact is I mean, he would still not look that much bigger. It'd not even remotely look that much bigger. But the fact is, his feet are not on that sidewalk. You can see they're not on that sidewalk at all. So they're all in the same area. They're all within this here, right in this area. So we know that this guy is far larger than these other guys. Now, I've seen guys that are extremely tall, but not like this. This guy, he's on a whole nother level. We're talking like the tallest guy in the NBA or something, you know what I mean? I mean, not even that, because he looks really thick as well. Because usually the guys that are extremely tall, they're super thin, and this guy is wearing a lot of armor. Look how big this pack is on his leg. I mean, goodness gracious, how much weight is he carrying around? Look at his helmet. It's like 2 or 3 times bigger than these guys. So we're not talking about just some dude that's just really tall. He wouldn't be carrying around this much armor. He just looks proportionally like as if he's just a man that's been enlarged. Not as if someone who just has some sort of weird growth to 9 foot, you know. And we don't even, and that's another thing. I don't think you have anybody in NBA that's even this tall, based on how this guy looks here. So obviously he looks like he could be a super soldier, and actually there's a number of videos like this now. This is just one. This was from 2014. We're talking about the Ferguson riots. Maybe this is a way to sort of subconsciously condition people to notice them and not notice them at the same time. That your subconscious mind notices them so that you're not so startled when you do see them in the future. And there are others, of course, that people have found. This is a picture from North Korea. You can see guys are about this tall here. And this guy is the same as with the other guy. It's about 3 foot taller than everyone else. Here he is. Here's the top of his head. It's a really grainy picture because it comes from a very distant camera, but you can see how he sticks out. I mean, his head's way up here, and these guys are way down here. And everybody else is about the same height except for this one guy. And that's from North Korea. Of course, then there's the story of the giant of Kandahar, Afghanistan, which some of our military had infiltrated his cave. It's going to show some footage of that here. Apparently a really big dude. and took out a number of the soldiers before they finally took him down.
You were in Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section of Afghanistan because a patrol had basically gone missing.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
there's no
Well,
villages
just
around
nothing.
for miles.
Right.
So it's very remote.
Yeah, very remote. So we flew in. About 4 kilometers. We're hiking to the same area where they were supposed to make one of their checkpoints, one of their rally points. And before we left, there was all kinds of what happened with the ambush, but that was even odd because at the point of the ambush, you would call for maybe close air support, something, okay? There was no calls made, just off the grid. So we're coming down a mountainside, and it was a nice path, a goat path. As we bent around this corner, you could see this opening of the cave. There's a cave as we're coming around. And then I see there's a lot of rocks, which is another oddity, and then bone matter. When I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see something I knew was a piece of our communications equipment. So instantly we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, could be anything. And there was enough room in front of this cave, but it had a sheer drop off. But there was enough room that we actually got into a decent dispersal in case of ambush.
You see something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you off guard.
Everybody. And he comes out. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet in height. This is a monster. Red beard, then his hair was longish past the shoulder, a scarlet red, and Dan runs at him and starts shooting, which broke all of us into the reality. Because it was so real.
Now your training is kicking in.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Muscle memory, complete muscle memory. While Dan is moving at him, another bro of mine's laying down fire and I start firing. He skewers Dan. He's now got him on this pike. It went through him. And he's still got him, and he's coming after more. We all just clicked in. I don't know what it was, but I remember we're all like, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. And our weapons components were M4s, we had 308s, and we had Barrett 50s. This is sounding longer than it took. We're talking 30 seconds. And he's taking multiple hits and is still moving.
He talked about this giant being 1,100 pounds, anywhere from 10 to 15 feet long, and it was killed. It was apparently shot somewhere in a cave in Afghanistan, but before it was shot, it lunged at several of our troops, our soldiers. It may have even gorged somebody. It was just a bizarre story, and it just sounds like the Nephilim from the Bible, doesn't it?
That's why we're so fascinated by this.
And you have to assume that the giant is not alone, that the giant is not the only being living on this planet. There's got to be a whole school of them somewhere. Maybe he's got a female mate. Maybe he's got children. Who knows? Unfortunate that he had to attack our soldiers rather than be somewhat peaceful, but I guess that comes with the territory.
Dan was dead. Okay. And why is a good man, probably one of the best men I know, now dead. Before I'd left, they were already starting what they call a 9-line, which is a medevac request. They're sending out a medevac request, then all of a sudden it's not a medevac request. All of a sudden we had a helicopter show up because, like I told you, it was a large precipice and a sheer drop. So the helicopter just came up from the drop. They had dropped netting, which is like cargo netting. It's like squares. We were told we had to bundle him up. And we get another bigger helicopter, but it's almost like a Jolly Green Giant used to look back in the day that could get, through this area. Because the mountains, you gotta remember, Chinooks could only go in certain places because they had enough lift. Mm-hmm. And So we got him on there. The thing was too big. We couldn't move it. It smelled worse than a skunk. A corpse that's been around for a while.
Really fell.
Oh, it was like a combination because of the, how do you put that, the persistence of a skunk smell. But once the helicopter came in, dropped its little hook, and off he goes. The communication was sent out that we had a very large possible human creature.
There you are in the hills of Afghanistan. How many troop members are you with?
We had 6 on my crew. When we say hills of Afghanistan, for us, we did not fly into the wilderness. We actually flew into a base. I guess this thing was transloaded out of the mountains by a CH-47. What I could see that it did have the 6 fingers. I remember taking my foot up and placing it up next to its foot, and it was extremely large. We estimated it at about 12 feet, give or take. What I can tell you is the weight of the thing. Basically, it was approximately 1,500 pounds when it was getting on the aircraft. Now, if you take away the pallet weight and all the rigging that we had to hold this thing down, we figured.
Now, giantism is not something that has to be hardwired into the genetic code as an inherited trait. Modern genetics provides alternative pathways to this outcome. One, as we've mentioned before, is the retrovirus approach. If it is DNA that is alluded to, we can add here the information that modern molecular biologists admit that a modern retrovirus could allow the DNA of Nephilim to be injected into human beings, gradually changing the modern human until he becomes more like a pre-flood giant. Perhaps into such genetically altered bodies, the spirits of the Nephilim, the demons, and fallen angels could be reinfused once they have been released from the abyss for their short spell before judgment. It's claimed that one of the recent battles at the Dulce underground facility involved giants, and that some of the stasis giants have been taken there and reanimated. They are so powerful, says Steve Quayle, that it is said their containment cages have steel bars nearly 2 feet in diameter. Now, retroviruses essentially inject single-stranded RNA strands into somatic body cells during the infection phase. These ssRNA, or single-strand RNA strands, then access nucleotide pools in the host cell and form a double-stranded DNA copy. This DS, or double-strand DNA, can then incorporate itself into the host chromosome using a viral enzyme called integrase. The new fake gene then orders the cell to make more mRNA copies of the original virus RNA. These then travel out of the cell and infect the next cell and so on, so they act very much like a virus. So when Nimrod began to be a great one in the earth, was it because he was infected or injecting himself somehow with such a retrovirus? We notice he's certainly very large, because a lion is a large animal, but he sort of just got it under his arm like it was a pet cat or something. So according to the Bible, Nimrod began to be halal, which properly means either profaned or defiled or polluted or desecrated, and this could be ritual or sexual or genetic desecration. It's quite broad in meaning. So we have to try to figure out, what does the Bible mean when it says he was halal and became a great one on the earth. Now, Nimrod was also a mighty one, which is the Hebrew word gibor, before the Lord. For instance, this is the root of the word Gabriel, which means who is as mighty as God. So Gibor is also a hero. In the passage that says mighty God, it's actually El Gibor, God the mighty one. A word which can be very large, powerful, a giant, heroic, or a warrior, and it can even mean a hunter. Now, we've seen it in Bible translations as Nimrod was a great hunter before the Lord, but perhaps the correct translation should really be Nimrod desecrated himself into a giant. That's potentially there also in the words. suggesting the expression of a gene for giantism that had only briefly maybe been suppressed in the line of Ham, combined with introduction into his own system of a retrovirus. Joshua, who was under orders from God, attacks the giants and defeats them. The giants flee from Palestine to the coasts of the Mediterranean and are later found along the coast of Carthage in Greece, in the Greek Isles also, and in Sicily. So now we're going beyond Italy. Afterwards, they spread even further afield and end up finally in the Americas. And of course, in those days, we don't know, but perhaps the American and European continents were closer together and not quite as far apart as we now see them. It depends how much work continental drift had done by the time of Joshua. So after this, of course, maybe we could put it down to epigenetics, but the giants gradually get smaller, and this might be because of such things as a gradual change in atmospheric pressure, perhaps the change in the ratio of nitrogen to oxygen in the atmosphere, less oxygen, more nitrogen. So, in high oxygen states, things have a chance to grow bigger and live longer, perhaps. And perhaps it could be just the pure epigenetic response, where the circumstances in one person's life are coded somehow onto their DNA and then passed on to their children, so that their children are slightly better adapted to that environment than their parents were. So if you have a continual lack of food and lots of long periods of starvation, then the epigenetic response might be to make the next generation a little bit smaller, so the demands for food are slightly reduced. Anyway, those later found in the Americas, as we now find in those many mounds that are even now being unearthed, the Olmec mounds and the mounds in Wisconsin and Ohio and places like that, we find that the giants that were there before the Indians came were about 7 to 10 feet tall. And that's still very tall, but it's not quite as big as the giants that were there in the earlier history of the world. Now, human genetics are also gradually degrading with time, and that further prevents the fallen spirits from making use of our genetics. The bodies before were, they didn't have quite so many faults in them. Nevertheless, human bodies are still pretty effective, and spirits and demons could certainly still make use of modern humans, and I'm sure they do. Now, the history of giants sees them peak, according to Philostratus anyway, a Greek historian. He mentions that the biggest giant he ever heard of was 54 feet in height. But many were reaching to around about 35, 36 feet in height before Noah's flood, which is still a tremendously huge human being. Canaan's giants, 1,000 years later than that, are not the tallest there ever were, but they could stand as tall as 15 feet in height even then. Europe's giants at the same time were found across the 10 to 18 foot range, right through to the Middle Ages, and they were still reaching 10 feet tall by the 1700s when the explorers discovered them in Easter Island and other places. Now, the giants in the Americas also reached this height, and burial mounds being excavated finding whole populations of people whose average height was about 8 feet something tall. The game changer in the 21st century is technology and the galloping science of genetics. A high-tech arm of the modern military is looking at what sort of advantage is available from using the DNA of giants. And we've discussed some of these already. The super soldier program can now use genetics and the science of retroviruses to increase the size and strength of its soldiers. So certain military laboratories have been dedicated to this research. Obviously, if you're going to go to hand-to-hand combat, if you have very large people who are very strong, maybe they can take a few bullet hits too and keep moving and not knock down quite so quickly. The dead bodies of several well-preserved giants have been recovered in recent years, and the DNA of these giants is fully available to the scientists. But it's not the general scientists, it's the scientists employed by the deep state. The plan of a fake alien invasion also needs bodies for the aliens, and it's possible that, for effect, these alien attackers will also have giant bodies that are terrifying to the modern soldier. So the discovery of giants and the analysis of their DNA is going to advance this particular agenda too, to allow the mad geneticists, as it were, to come up with their giant aliens in scaled up form. So this era of genetics, giants, and diabolical plans to overthrow the world is just like the era of Noah, and it is as true of the secret world as it is of the public one, that the days of the coming of the Son of Man are in so many ways just like the days of Noah, as Jesus said. Thank you, folks. That's it for today, and possibly a bit less than usual, but we continue next week with part 6 of the Giants, where we have only 24 minutes or maybe 30 minutes to read the notes that I have before me, and we have nearly an hour of videos, so we're going to do it the other way around next week. I hope you have a great week. I hope you learned something tonight that was of some interest to you and some use to your understanding of the Scriptures and its traditions and history. Sometimes we just look at the Bible and think, there it is, it came like that, but it all came out of traditions and out of history and out of culture, out of belief systems, which God himself also fed into and cashed in on when he was speaking to the people at times. So there are notes, of course, for those who want to get copies of all these notes, everything I say. They're available as well, and a write-on version for those who like to fill in blanks as they go. So all of those things are available to you and will be next week as well, and every week. And I wish you all the best, and I hope truly to see you all again next week as we push forward in our understanding of all these matters and as they feed into our understanding of prophecy ultimately. So that's it for tonight, and thank you very much for coming, and bye-bye.